sun, how are you? Skies above, gee, it's great to be alive and in love. Good morning, sun. Good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above, gee, it's great to be alive and in love. Good morning, sun.
And good Saturday to you. Let's make sure everything is working here. Okay, looks like it is. And today I would like to review a small topic, but it's kind of nice in that it's this nice granular little chunk of information or knowledge, or it's a small topic that I can study. And I thought it was pretty clever. Not something I would have thought of to study as a specific topic, but when I saw the tweet and blog post, I thought that's pretty cool. And it's something I need to learn anyway. So let's take a look at that. So here is a tweet that Stefan, hope I'm saying that right, Stefan posted about Business Central conditions. And basically, I think he's talking about a specific if statement combination. And I don't know AL well enough, but I see we have an if statement and it has 3 different conditions and then a then, and it will then have a message. Okay, great. Then there's a second example that I don't quite understand yet because I don't know the syntax, but item, record item, UOM, record UOM. Okay. And there's a particular if not false, and he lays out 3 conditions within brackets. So very interesting combination or very interesting use of conditional statements, and I think this example is AL specific. So then he kindly went on and wrote a blog post just on conditional statements in AL, which is pretty cool. So I want to walk through those conditional statements that he gives examples of and try them, learn about AL conditional statements. I'm familiar with Visual Basic and .NET, and I've done a little JavaScript. I think those are all the languages that come to mind. So pretty basic, narrow set of languages that I've worked with. And AL has some similar concepts, but some of the specific syntax is different, and there are some twists to how AL evaluates conditional statements. So I think that's interesting, and I'd like to get more familiar with that. And Stefan provides some cool, clever ways to do multi-condition evaluation in AL. So I thought that was pretty neat. So let's take a look at that. So he posted on Twitter showing an alternative way to write an if condition. Yep. And so he provides more examples. So let's start with a basic if statement. And here we have a variable, myTextVar, text. If myTextVar is empty string, then display this message. And the first thing I notice is that AL uses an if-then syntax. So this is different than what I work with a lot in C#, where we have if parentheses to contain the evaluation, and C# then uses the curly braces to define the code block. And that curly brace is technically optional. You can have a single line action to perform after the condition. And also C# does not use the then statement. So this is a little bit like VB is what it kind of reminds me of. There's the parentheses is not required, and it is an if-then, and then it evaluates the line right below that. So let's give that a try. So over here I have VS Code with a Hello World project from ALGo. I haven't touched it other than make sure it publishes downloaded symbols, etc. And if we take a look at this, let's see, we have begin. So he does a variable up above. So I'm going to, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try to do the same thing, see if it works. Var and my text var text, okay, begin, and I will say if my text var equals empty string, then lowercase, and I'll indent that, and let me just say my text var is empty. Okay, so let's do a Control F5, or you can press F1 and select ALGo, or you can do Control Shift P. So someone, on one of my last videos, someone reminded me about F1. Thank you for that. I was learning Control Shift P to bring this drop-down menu or command menu, and that person reminded me you can just press F1. I'm all for simplicity, so F1 it is. And so we can do publish without debugging, or just press Control F5. And let me see if I have developer present. What is the, gosh, I've already forgotten. Shortcut. Anyway, I need to remember how to display the shortcut keys, but we're going to do Control F5. Oops, was that right? Yeah, I think Control F5. Okay, so great. We just passed our evaluation. So if my text var is blank, then display the message. So here we go. My text var is empty. Cool. Okay, I agree. That's a very basic, simple example. I have questions, but we'll move on. Okay, so it checks if the text variable is empty. In this case, some code is executed. Note that in AL, parentheses are not needed if you only have one condition or if you're comparing Booleans. So here, we don't have to have these. So it sounds like those are optional, but those can be supplied. So let's give that a try. So I'm used to this syntax with the parentheses from C#. So let's see what happens. So let me save, Control F5. Okay, so that worked. Excellent. So next up, okay, this was easy. Now, how about checking if two variables are empty? Okay, in this example, the parentheses are mandatory because in AL, the AND would try to evaluate empty string and my text var 2. Interesting. So AL doesn't, when it parses it or compiles it, it doesn't associate the equal sign and the preceding variable. So it would do empty string and my text var 2. And I also learning something else. You can do consecutive variable declarations up here. So I can do my text var 2. Interesting, there's a space there. There's no space there. I guess it doesn't matter. Let's find out. So there's a space before the colon, no space. Let's see how picky it is. So this multivariable declaration on a single line kind of reminds me of VB. I don't think C# supports it. At least it didn't used to. I never do multivariable declaration on a single line in C#. So this is VB-like for me. And we've declared two variables, and we're going to do if my text var is empty, and we have to go outside of the parentheses, and my text var 2 is empty. And interesting, these can occur on separate lines. So it looks like AL is not super sensitive to white space and line break. So let me try it this way, where my if statement is on a single line. Just visually, that's easier for me to read here. Obviously, for a blog post, you may want to condense it. But let's try this. Control F5. Okay, so I didn't change my message. So it just says my text var is empty. So it's working. We're not getting an error. So let's say both variables are empty. And let's try this. Let's copy his. Oops. So if condition 1 and condition 2. Okay, I can see that syntax or that formatting. I kind of like that. You have your condition lined up. It's, you know, a lot of times you'll do that in SQL to line up your parameters and variable assignments. Okay, so let's do another Control F5. Okay, cool. So far, so good. So it does not require a grouping of all conditions to be evaluated. They can be evaluated separately, or they are evaluated separately. The AND statement compares them. Okay, and let's just make something false. So if we say X, Y, oops, Y, Z, Control F5. Okay, we did not get the message, so everything is working. Okay, so pretty basic stuff, just some differences than, from what I'm used to from the .NET world. So in this example, okay, they were mandatory, right? Now let's see what happens if we get rid of the parentheses. Interesting. So it doesn't like this. Operator AND cannot be applied to operands of type text and text. So because these aren't booleans, I'm assuming, it's saying, hey, I need a boolean to evaluate. So this results in a boolean. So my text var equals empty string, and my text var2 equals empty string. Okay, so it needs to kind of ultimately result in a boolean for each evaluator. Great. If you need to evaluate more than 2 conditions and maybe even nest conditions, this can get messy. Okay, so if you have, let me see if I can make this bigger. Okay, so if you have my text var 2, and my text var 2 equals my text var or this, so multiple conditions plus an or, so you mix an and and ors, things start to pile up. So let's just try that. So and, oops, and, so we'll do double parentheses, my text var, I'll go a little differently, my text var 2, or my text var equals test. Okay. I'll make this a little narrower here. Okay, so I believe I've replicated this. Okay, so he has perhaps some extension that allows the parentheses to be yellow on these inner parentheses. So if statement evaluated to true. Okay, so let's do a Control F5. Okay, so that worked, but as he's pointing out, this can get messy. So if this happens, he tends to write the conditions this way. Okay, so if not false in 1, 2, 3, which I've never seen this type of conditional operator or conditional structure before. I don't think I've seen that in the .NET world. So let's give that a try. So we'll say if not false in, and then interesting. It's not, let me just do that. You don't need the parentheses. It's kind of like a case statement hybrid. Interesting. So then you do a comma. Oh, but we do need this or this. There's no terminator there, but there is, oops, that, close paren. Okay, so if not false in. So, well, this is potentially a little more elegant here. This if not false, it's like a double negative. Are you not going? It's like, if it is not false, well, we want it true. So that's the only thing I'm not keen on at the moment, but I see the cleanliness of doing that rather than a bunch of if statements, because here, you know, this will evaluate to a boolean, this will evaluate to a boolean, so will this, and as long as all of these are true and there aren't any false values in this condition, then it should evaluate. If not. Interesting. So yeah, that's a little confusing, if not false in. But, okay, so let's do this. Save it. Control F5. If statement evaluated to true, so that works. I'm just wondering if there's a way to avoid the confusion with the double negative of not false. I'd love to have positive evaluation here. False in true, true, true. Okay, well, let's go on. I know he has a couple other examples. So it is even easier to do for a or statement. Okay, this one I do like. So if we say if true in, we don't have the parentheses. So let's just simplify this. You have the brackets. And so this is like kind of like a SQL in statement. So if you have a true in these evaluations, so this evaluates to true or this evaluates to true, if either of those evaluate to true, then it passes the condition. And let me get rid of that parentheses. So if true in any of these scenarios, this or this, and why is it complaining? Then message, syntax error. Oh, I have an extra comma. Okay. So let's save that. Control F5. Okay, so that works. So I like this for the or. I'm not as keen on having to do the double negative for the and version, but if you're doing a lot of evaluations, it makes total sense to try and clean that up and not make any mistakes on the ands or ors. So I agree that that does seem a little bit simpler. The in statement checks if the value before in occurs at least once in the list of values that follow. Very cool. So yikes. Okay, let me make this bigger. Okay, so we have my text var 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So this looks involved, but to me it's just a bunch of nested ifs. And I'm sure he's doing this as a, yeah, he is doing this as a contrived example. But if I saw this in code, I would say, that's not good, that needs to be cleaned up. That's a mess, just visually, maintenance-wise, and then if you're doing that many evaluations in sequence, not ideal. But obviously this is just a contrived example to demonstrate a technique. So we have this, it's like 5 nested if statements, and you can shorten this up with a case statement. Okay, so let's just go with the case statement. So begin, case true of. Interesting. So the word of, that's new to me. And there are no begin or ends here. Oh, there's a case end. Okay. So case true of my text var. Huh. I'm not getting IntelliSense. Maybe I need to clear this out. What doesn't it like? Expression. Okay, so what am I doing wrong? I have my variables, case. Oh, yeah, variables, begin, case true of, my text var. Okay, let me see what comes up. See why it's complaining. Message, my text var is empty. Semicolon. Okay, let me just see if this compiles. Syntax error end expected. Case. Oh, okay. So we need a additional end. I'm assuming that's the problem. Yep. Okay, cool. So as he highlighted in red, okay, so let's try this now. So we have my text var 2. Okay, and let me just do a 3. And we can copy this. Okay. So Control F5. Oh. Okay, so it evaluates the first one only. Okay, which makes sense, because if my text var is empty, then do this message else. Okay, so it's a switch case switch statement, and it hits the first condition that evaluates to true. Okay, cool. Got it. So that's interesting. So that's like a case statement. Okay. If nothing helps and your condition is not clear to understand, you can put it in a function. Okay, so let's try that. I don't know how to do that, but this is trigger on page. I may be out of my depth here. So T procedure. And local my test procedure colon boolean. Okay, so a procedure, what's a function, but it's called a procedure in code, returns a boolean var, and what we're going to do is begin end. Okay, so begin, I think I can just paste this in here. Local procedure var begin end. Okay, let's see if I can go up here, and I'm going to get rid of my var begin, and then if my test procedure, then, so if it evaluates to true, message, my test procedure returned true. Okay, or true. And semicolon, end. Cool. So let's try that. Oh, my text var is empty. Oh, okay. So I forgot to clean this up. So let's go back to this and, oh, okay. So evaluate, okay, I didn't fix this. Case true of, okay, so this is fancier. It's using exit. Got it. So it exits, it returns the result of the evaluation. And he's using ORs. So here we see exit, my text var, empty, or, and. Okay. So let's try that. So let's try this. Let me just, he's showing a very consolidated, efficient method for the single line exit. And C# does that a lot. You can get some really, really dense statements, very efficient, but not terribly readable. So in this case, I see that it's all done in one line, which is nice for white space, but white space is cheap, in my opinion. So I'd rather go for clarity. So let me see if I can do this. Exit, true. Let me see if that's how things are done. Okay, so this is always going to evaluate true, but let's just see what happens. Control F5. Okay, so it says it returned true. Okay, so personally, I prefer readability over density and compactness. So this would be hard for me to read, whereas I find this one easier to read, where I would essentially set a variable. And let me see if I can learn how to do that. So let's do my result boolean. Okay. And so let's see what happens. So my result, let's initialize it to false. And granted, I do not know what I'm doing, so syntax error end. Okay, it doesn't like that. Doesn't like that. Okay, so out of my depth here. We need a begin and end. Okay, so I'll have to learn how to do that later, but I prefer this kind of visually I'm able to follow what's going on. Normally what I would do is I would assign my result. So something like my result equals false, or excuse me, true. And let me just do a quick. So AL Boolean assignment. Business Central. AL simple statements. Colon equal. Okay. Equals is equal sign is evaluation. Colon equal is assignment. Cool. So let's try that. Colon equal true. Yay. Okay, small victories, just learned something. So equal is evaluation, colon equal is assignment. In the C# world, that would be single equal sign is assignment, double equals is evaluation. Okay, so now I'm going to do this. Replace, oops, and replace these exits. And then what I'm going to do is exit my result. So this is more kind of my simple style. I prefer simple over fancy, more readable over dense. And I don't care how many lines it takes as long as it is visually clean. Now, I agree that this can get, in his example, this can start to get really messy when things are piled up with a bunch of boolean operators. In the case of this case statement, I think this is fine. So let's try this. Control F5. Very cool. Okay. What's next? Oops. What did I do? Hello world. There we go. And going back to his blog post. Okay, so don't be afraid of long function names. Totally agree. Make them readable. Don't make it myproc or proc17. Okay, so he's got these examples in GitHub. So that was neat. So I particularly liked the example, which I think was kind of the point of his original tweet. If true in, and you can have a list of evaluations, very similar to a SQL in. So I think that's pretty cool. And then you can clean this up pretty nicely with a case statement. Oh, there's else. Okay, so let's do an else. I was wondering about that. Okay, my result is false. So let's try this. 1, 2, 3. This should evaluate to false. And let's see if we can do an else. Okay, and it doesn't like that, so I'm doing something wrong. If else. Oh, if then. Ooh. Wow, that's pretty subtle. So if you have an if then if you have an if then, you terminate with a semicolon. If you have an if then else, you terminate with a semicolon, but only at the end of the else evaluation or result. You do not have a semicolon for your if evaluation. Wow, that's different. Okay, well, at least the IntelliSense and the Visual Studio or VS Code shows you that you've done something wrong. Huh. Okay, that is very different for me. So now what we've done is we have a case with an else. We are going to force it to produce a false condition, and that is going to roll back and should display that we return false. So Control F5. There we go. My test procedure returned false. Kind of nice. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Funny enough, we have if statements up top for our message to determine which message we display. I've figured out a Boolean variable and assignment through colon equals, and we have a case statement which does multiple evaluations, which result in Booleans, and we then do variable assignment to determine which one of those was true or which one was triggered. And we have an else statement as our fall through or our final catch. And our function, which is actually a local procedure in AL, exits returning the result of that function. Kind of nice. I'm learning. Okay, cool. Now, he wraps it up there. I think that's a great example, just focusing on a really granular topic and digging into it. I think that's an awesome technique. Now, what I did is I pulled up the AL control statements page from Microsoft Docs. So this is Dynamics 365 Business Central Developer AL Programming. And this page is the AL control statements. Now, it covers a lot of stuff. So AL conditional statements is just one of these sections. So we have already covered if, then, else. And they don't mention the semicolon thing. Okay, square brackets around the else mean this part of the statement is optional. What do they mean by square brackets? Do they mean that? Oh, look at that. Okay. That's... Oh, I see. That's just the documentation indicating they're optional. That's not an actual syntax of the evaluation. Okay, so they say square brackets, but they forgot to include square brackets. So I might submit a correction to this. You can build more complex control structures by nesting. Yep, so Stefan showed that if and a nested if. I'm not a fan of nested ifs because as soon as you start going down nested ifs, you ended up with this hairball of nested ifs, and it becomes very confusing to track which conditions are evaluating to true or false and how that logic occurs. So I try to avoid nested ifs personally. Okay, a semicolon in front of an else statement is not allowed. I discovered that. So if I do a semicolon here, no bueno. I need to delete that. Okay, good. Reading several nested if-then statements can be very confusing. Hey, reading my mind there. But generally an else statement belongs to the last if statement, okay? If and then should be on the same line. Else should be on a separate line. So if, then, and else. So I think we could do something like this. Oops. If, then, if my procedure, then message, else message. So let's just try that, see what happens. Looks like it's VS Code reformats it anyway, so never mind. If there are many long expressions, then should be on a new line and be aligned with if. Okay, so if you have a bunch of expressions going across the top here, then you can put the then statement aligned with the if. Okay, interesting. I'd say you probably want to clean that up if you have multiple on that if statement. If you write an if expression with then and else parts, write them so that the then result is more probable than the else. Okay, got it. That's a best practice where you want this to typically evaluate. So if the customer is not on hold or if the customer is active, then proceed with option number 1. It's not if customer has obscure conditions like they're over credit limit and that's a 1% condition, fire this. Otherwise, for 99% of our customers, proceed with this code. They're saying try to make the first evaluation the more common situation. Make sense? If the last statement in the then part of an if then else statement is an exit or an error. Okay, if the last statement in the then part of an if then else statement is an exit or an error, do not continue with an else. Let me read that another time. If the last statement in the then part of an if then else is an exit or an error, so they're saying I guess if then, like if I did exit here, do not continue with an else. Okay, and it looks like it's complaining. So orphaned else statement. Got it. Okay, so in other languages, often you can do something like a return within your if statement. So if this condition, like if I encounter this error, then jump out of this entire procedure or this function. It looks like AL does not support that, or at a minimum, it's not best practice. I get it. That's a common thing where you don't want to just bail out of the middle of your routine. So like in this, I wouldn't want to do exit right here. So I first evaluate these conditions, let them complete, and then based on the result of that, I will return that result. So I guess that makes sense. You don't want to have exits, 4 different exits here. You just want to have one exit at the end. Okay. There's probably a lot more background to that, but okay. So you have this simple example, if x equals y, assign x plus 1, else x minus 1. That's strange, but okay. And if x, y, and a, b, okay. Okay, so these are simple. Okay, if, then, exit true. So this is a single if statement without an else, and they are including an exit here. So if it does evaluate to true, then exit with a true. Otherwise, proceed and perform these. Okay? Now, I was looking at this earlier, and at the time, I didn't understand what was causing this to be incorrect. They say incorrect example, but they don't explain why it's incorrect. Ah, I see now. So if x is less than y, then exit true, else. And so this is incorrect because there is an else after the exit. And so if you have an exit or an error, do not continue with an else statement. Okay, it would be nice if they just had a sentence explaining that, because before I went through this, I stared at this and didn't understand what was wrong with it. So then we have an if then else without the, or if then without optional else. Okay, we covered that. Nested if then else. Okay, and then the case statement, which Stefan provided. And here they actually do provide brackets for the else to indicate that the else is optional, right? Now, I always like to have else's in my switch case statements, just so you know, because invariably some condition comes up that may not be handled, so you want to handle it. In this definition, expression cannot be a record, and value set must be an expression or range. Okay, I don't know those objects yet. Okay. Programming conventions. When you use a case statement, indent the value sets by 2 character spaces. Okay. This is the whole space tab. So, oops. Let me get that back. So here, I think they're saying 1, 2. Okay, fine. Space tab, whatever. Not important to me, but if that's the convention. Last value in a set line immediately, okay. If you have 2 or more values on the same set line. Ah, okay. So we can do comma. Oops. We could do that. No. If you have 2 or more value sets on the same line, separate them by commas without spaces. No? Okay. field C, field D. Okay, I'm not quite sure what that means. I get the comma thing, I just don't know what they're saying about two or more value sets. Huh, okay. So I'll have to look into that, understand what that means, but okay. Ah, case number of. Okay, that makes sense. So if we did var my number integer, and I said my number colon equals 1, then we could say case number of one comma 2 comma 3 comma 4 oh I'm indenting when they're saying I'm used to tab, and so we're going to say my result equals true. And then you can do 5, 6, 7, 8. My result equals false. Okay. Case number of. Number does not exist in the current context. Oh, my number. Okay. Cool. So this advice to use two character spaces, that is also not valid because VS Code is, at least by default, I haven't changed any VS Code settings. VS Code is automatically reformatting the code to be a tab, which is 4 spaces. So yeah, I don't know who came up with that recommendation, but I'm assuming it's old or relates to some other environment. So, okay, so if I do a control F5 now, and cool. So now if I change this to 6, return false. Excellent. So that was cool. Learned a little bit about the syntax. I'm going to have to use this for a few dozen times to remember it. But I think what else did we get? Programming conventions, case statement. Okay, okay, my code. Oh, this is interesting. So my code ABC all caps, my code ABC lowercase. Okay, so let's try this. Because C# is case sensitive, so I've become used to that. So I'm curious if AL is case sensitive. So let's do my code, and what is this? Text. Okay. And let's say my code ABC with apostrophes, not quotation marks, and case my code of, and apostrophe ABC lowercase, colon, my result's true, that's fine, and DEF, and oh, you cannot have a semicolon there, so that should work. No. Oh, I need a colon, okay. Maybe I do need a semicolon there. Okay, got it. Okay, so let's do the string evaluation. It returned true. So good to know. It is not case sensitive. I'm sure that's obvious to anyone who's used it, but I just learned that. Cool. And requires you create the following code data type variable. The value set ABC is not converted because my code is a code variable. Okay, I don't know what a code variable is yet, but I'll have to look that up. Okay, so this goes into other control mechanisms, repetitive for each while, etc. So I think that was cool. So thank you to Stefan for writing this blog post, Condition Basics in AL. I learned a little bit and some interesting examples. I don't know how many I'll use in practice of these formats. In C#, it's very similar. You have some very clever ways of doing syntax, but I tend to shy away from those if they're not super clear visually. So I'll go with simple and basic and perhaps repetitive, as long as it's visually simple and more readable, instead of the much more dense and compact single line evaluations, because I'll often glance at those and have to sit there and try to figure out the logic. And I find it easier for me to make a mistake evaluating those than, if it's super simple, it's like, oh, okay, simple, basic, I get it, and move on. So very cool. So I'm going to see if I can submit a couple minor corrections for this. The first one is up here. It says that square brackets, but they didn't put this in square brackets. And then the second thing is they talk about a code convention of 2 spaces, but Visual Studio Code defaults and reformats to a tab, which is 4 spaces. So I'm going to see if I can submit those to the Microsoft Docs. And so with that, have a great day and enjoy.
Good